What is key to a lasting peace in Ukraine? We have a special guest with very unique insight as both a mother and a member of Ukraine's parliament. I'm Jenna, and this is Smarter News. We first met Ina Sovsun, a Ukrainian lawmaker, at the very beginning of Russia's invasion of Ukraine. I reached out to her after seeing a social media post that you're going to hear us discuss today. She's sitting next to a gun in this post, attempting to work during the early days of the invasion. And I learned she was a mother of a young son and had a loved one fighting on the front lines. And we've touched base every year over the last several years because, unlike anyone else, Ina reminds us that foreign policy is personal. And although we know there are many perspectives on the way forward in Ukraine, we didn't want to forget hers. Here's Ina Sovsun. Ina, it's so nice to see you again. It's been several years that we've been able to touch base, and I look forward to our conversations every time because you provide such a unique perspective. Let me just start with a general question, which is can be tough to answer in this sort of a situation. How are you doing? How's your family? How are things going?
Yeah, that's the simplest question, yet the most complicated one, because it's very difficult to explain. You could say in one word, like not very well, I think, but then explaining that will take time. But I think at this point of time, everybody is very tired and exhausted, living under this war. I mean, I'm lucky my family is okay-ish to an extent possible, but my partner is still in the front lines. I've hardly seen him over the last 3.5 years now. My son is okay. He goes to school, but he spent 3.5 years of his childhood as a child living in the territory of war, waking up from air raid alerts and from drone attacks and all of that. So it's okay given an extent, given the context of our situation, which is of course far from ideal.
I just saw on social media that you put a post in the recent days. There was a very close scare. Can you tell our audience a little bit about that?
Gosh, that was terrifying. It was the night from Saturday to Sunday, and there was yet another air raid alert, which basically happens every night in Kyiv. So we typically just ignore them, just because they happen every night. You can't go down to the shelter every night. You would be sleep deprived, and you would die from that. And it was drones attacks. We typically try to hide when it's ballistic missiles. If it's drones, you typically just try to stay, in your bed and try to get some sleep. And then I could hear a very loud explosion, like very loud. I have never heard it so loud. I literally jumped up out of my bed and rushed into the corridor, and I could hear some unexpected noise, which I couldn't understand what was that, if my windows were blown out of something. And then next morning I was walking around my room, and I saw the handle from my window fell off because of the blast. Because the explosion took place, like literally, I walked there with my son yesterday, and it was literally 5 minutes walk from my home. 5 minutes. Like for drone, it's literally 5 seconds fly. If it this the drone was taken down by Ukrainian air defense, but it fell down, and it fell down on one of the residential buildings, and one of the apartments there was very severely damaged. Nobody died there, but it was the closest I have got it during the wartime.
And how did that shift you, having that experience?
Uh, I couldn't sleep that night. My son was with his dad that night, so I was we share custody, and luckily that very night he stayed with his dad. And I thought that's the good part of that, because I don't want him to remember that for the rest of his life, because that was a terrifying experience. Yeah, and all of that in the midst of all the conversations about the peace deal. We're gonna have some sort of peace agreement. If that were the case, then why the hell are they sending drones into civilian cities? Like, there is no reason to send drones into Kyiv. Like, no, they're not even pretending that they're attacking some sort of military infrastructure. They just have the drones, and they send it to exhaust us, to scare us. And that's the single reason why they're doing that.
That was my next question, of course, is that you're having this experience. And then on the global stage, we're seeing this other conversation happen that includes obviously your country about a peace deal, about a ceasefire, about what could possibly happen to bring an end to this conflict. And then you're having this personal experience where the war is right outside your window. So how does that impact the way that you lead as a lawmaker in Ukraine and your sort of calculations about what you're willing to discuss and what you're willing not to discuss?
Look, it's fair to say that given that we are the ones who are suffering most from this, we are the ones who want this to be over more than anything. There is nothing I want more than my partner to come back home, and then we can resume our lives together as we did prior to 2022. Being apart for all those years is exhausting. I know many couples who broke up because of that. I know many people who, didn't manage to live through that, and so on and so forth. So I really want him back home and safe, and I really want this to be over. I really want my son to stop running to the shelter during the daytime when they're at school and there is yet another air raid alert. But one thing I keep having in my mind is this thought that, yes, I want my partner back from war, but I don't want the sort of peace that will erupt one day and will end up in a situation where my son will have to go to the war as well. That's something very critical. That's me as a mother, me as a woman thinking, but this is what also dictates my understanding of the strategy that we should employ. That's how I read the situation, but that's also how all other Ukrainians read the situation. We don't want the sort of peace that will be unstable, the peace that will not, bring Ukrainians back home, peace that will not make us feel safe in our own homes, peace that will not get our, the simple stuff like we need investments to rebuild our country. If there is no security in the country, then nobody's going to invest, and people are going to be not at war, but they're going to be poor, and then they will be leaving, and that's going to be a devastation for the whole country. So we need some stable peace, a peace that will not erupt in yet another war. We need deterrence mechanisms, we need security guarantees, all of that, because it's not just on the individual life, it's survival of the country. This country will not be able to survive if it doesn't have that sort of backup.
What is the key to that piece?
Well, as of right now, I can point out the kind of the things that we're not ready to accept. That's something that we all share, because that's part of the negotiation process. Some of the things that Putin is saying or his cronies are saying when they're demanding Ukraine should do this or should do that. Some things are definitely unacceptable to us. One is the requirement that Ukraine shouldn't continue to mobilize the army, to mobilize the economy, should not build its own weapons, should not get weapons from the partners, and so on and so forth. Accepting that would just be stupid on our side. Why would we agree not to, of course we want, we don't, if there is no active war, we will not need 1 million people in the armed forces. But we will need to build up our arms arsenal so that we are not attacked again, so that we are not in the situation where they can easily attack us because they know we have no weapons to defend ourselves. That would just be stupid. So I think that is critical, that whatever peace we get, we will need to ensure that we are able to defend ourselves if this war erupts again. And this is not because we are aggressive or anything. This is a deterrence mechanism. We need this because we don't want to be attacked again. For that, we need more weapons. That's slightly perverse, but that is actually very logical. The second thing that is also critical is, of course, we need some guarantees from our partners. We used to say that some perspective of NATO membership. As of right now, I think that people are looking slightly different at that. People are not very much sure if NATO membership is actually a security guarantee. If any NATO member state in Europe is attacked by Russia tomorrow, will Article 5 actually deliver for that state? That's under question right now. I'm not.
And is that because of the actions of the current administration, or is that because of a change?
Yeah, because of the actions of the current administration. I'm talking to many partners in other Eastern European countries, and they're all extremely concerned about that. They say that we hope it would work, we hope Article 5 will deliver, but hope is a bad strategy, right? We can't rely on that any longer. And I will add here this one element. I actually, on this point, agree with President Trump, who says that Europe should be taking greater responsibility for its own security. It cannot continue to rely on US for security. It should be building its own armies, its own military production, and so on and so forth. That's actually quite logical step, and I think that is what many European countries are doing right now. But anyways, so Article 5 might not be the best option right now, but some sort of guarantees from other countries, written guarantees that will state obviously that if Ukraine is attacked, this is what Ukraine is getting. That's something that we need. And then I think the third one, which I understand is largely discussed right now, that is the territories. Ukraine is not willing to give up its territory legally. I understand it's a complicated question. One would say there is no way you will get Crimea back militarily. Majority of the people understand that as well. But if we give it up legally, say it's not Ukrainian territory any longer, I'm even skipping the impossibility of that because it's changing the constitution, and that would require the referendum and all of that. It's close to impossible from that perspective. But there is a good proverb about a tiger. You give a tiger a hand, the tiger will come back for more. If Crimea is officially recognized as Russian territory, then Putin will say it worked. My strategy delivered. Then he will come back for more. He has no reason to stop if his strategy is working. So I think that is also important. We might not be ready to fight for all of the territory militarily, but we might still have the right political moment and wait for that right political moment to get our territory.
I noticed your wording, though, that you would legally give the territory to Russia or to Vladimir Putin. I was reading some different, obviously analysis about what was happening between Ukraine and Russia. And what New York Times was talking about is a quote unquote freeze the fighting, and that there would be no acknowledgement of legal territory going one direction or the other. It would basically be, we agree to disagree about this territory, but we're going to freeze it right now and sort of push it off, if you will. I mean, it sounds kind of difficult to visualize, but this is what's being reported here in the United States. So I'm curious, is that what you mean when you're saying you could be open to not legally giving territory, but a freeze of the fighting, so you could agree to disagree, but stop the war?
Look, that's a complicated issue because the conditions of the freeze are important, right? If the conditions of the freeze is Ukraine, stops arming itself, doesn't have any more weapon support and so on and so forth, then we would not agree to that because that would be illogical. But if we continue to get weapons support, if we continue to train our army, if we continue to prepare ourselves so that we are not attacked again, then this sort of freeze, I think, would be accepted by the Ukrainian society. That's not going to be easy because we already had that freeze in 2016, which erupted in a new war in 6 years after that. There is one thing that New York Times cannot report, but I think it's on everybody's minds here in Ukraine, is that Putin is not going to live forever. And if we manage to wait it until he dies for natural or unnatural causes, then the situation in Russia might change very differently. And then we might get our political momentum where we can get back those territories without losing people on the front lines. So that's, a politically incorrect statement. But look, I don't think there is anybody who expects us to like Putin or to care for his well-being.
Well, it's an interesting point, and one that's come up in a few different interviews that we've done about timelines. We know that America's leadership changes every 4 years. Russia's leadership is obviously different. And there's that question about if Vladimir Putin is no longer a leader, is there more or less of an opportunity given the case? And it's tough to tell the future. Let me drill down on just two more quick points that have to do with policy. And then I just want to ask you quickly as well, just some personal questions, because foreign policy is personal. When you were talking about perhaps not having that that requirement or that desire to be a member of NATO because of a changing environment, would membership in the EU be something that the Ukrainians would get behind as sort of a trade? Okay, we're not part of this larger military alliance, but perhaps we're part of the EU, and that could be acceptable to Russia and Ukraine. What do you think is the calculation around that?
No, I don't think that is the trade-off. Ukrainians want both. Ukrainians both want membership in the EU, and we're working very hard in the parliament on adjusting legislation, and so it's a very complicated process. I'm actually chairing the subcommittee on European integration in energy issues. It's a very long, bureaucratic, boring, invisible process, but it is happening. But EU is more about prosperity, about well-being, economic possibilities, and so on and so forth. It's no substitute for security guarantees. It has no security policy, it has no security guarantees on itself. And I would say that even if you look at the Ukrainian society, the society has, for a very long period of time, been very supportive of EU membership. NATO membership and support for NATO membership came much later. There is a popular misreading of this situation where some people, I would say I've seen it a lot on Twitter, particularly from the Republican part, saying that Russia attacked Ukraine because Ukraine wanted to join NATO. But it actually happened vice versa. The moment Russia attacked, about 20 or 25% of Ukrainians wanted to join NATO. Actually, the level of support for NATO membership has risen so enormously after Russia attacked, because we see NATO as a guarantee that it will not attack again. So it's actually completely opposite to what is often being reported, that Ukraine wanted NATO and that is why Russia attacked. No, actually Ukrainians were not that willing to join NATO, but on EU it was different. So this is a parallel processes in Ukrainian history, but also in the minds of the people of Ukraine. But no, EU membership is not a substitute because it provides no security guarantees.
Interesting. And the reason why I asked that in part about the economic alliance is because of the next question, which is we got news about this investment deal. We're now part of an investment fund, potentially. You and I together. And I laugh at that because here we are, like so many different relationships between Americans and Ukrainians. The new idea, and we have the text of it, thankfully, from the Ukrainians, is an investment fund that the Trump administration and Ukrainian leadership has come together to form. It's my understanding, though, it still needs the support of lawmakers like yourself. So can you talk us through that? Just can you describe the atmosphere around this deal in Ukraine? Does it have support of lawmakers like yourself? What do you think is important about it, or what are your concerns about it?
Okay, I think I'll start with the concerns. The concerns are not so much about the content of the deal, but about the fact that American administration has been pushing Ukraine towards some sort of deal, but it hasn't applied not similar amount of pressure against Russia. So it's a very weird situation where pressure is being put onto the country that is supposedly the partner of the United States, the country that has been attacked illegally, but the pressure is not being put on the country who is the attacker, who is actually on the other side of if you look at the values of that those two countries represent, and so on and so forth. So I think this context matters. I think that is why it still feels unfair to the Ukrainians, because why are we being forced into something? What are Russians being forced into? Basically, the only thing that the Russians are debating whether they would be willing to give up is their nightly killings of Ukrainians, right? They are offering nothing else. Like, we're not giving up anything else except for maybe we'll stop killing Ukrainians for a while. So I think this general context has framed the debate to a very big extent. Another part is of course, the story of how this was developing, right? Because at one point of time, the deal that was proposed was just neo-colonial, right? That felt very bad here, and it was not acceptable to the Ukrainian politicians or to the Ukrainian people, because it felt unjust, unjustified. It felt just wrong on many levels. So we are happy right now that the deal has changed. That there has been a reaction towards the outburst of negative outbursts that we could see against that deal. The deal still doesn't provide for any security guarantees for Ukraine, and of course that is something we're not happy about. But I think the most important part of that deal is the very fact that Ukraine and the United States keep on talking, that we keep on engaging, and this conversation is ongoing, and we have proven that we can come to common solutions. And what is also important, at one point of time, you remember a couple of weeks ago, the United States has suspended all military aid and intelligence sharing to Ukraine. That was a terrifying moment for all of us. Of course, we still we produce lots of weapons ourselves right now. We get a lot from Europe, so America provides us with about 30% of the military of the weapons that we're using. But at some points, like air defense, it's critically important. There is nobody we can buy Patriot missiles from, and Patriot missiles are the only ones that take down ballistic missiles that are attacking Ukrainian cities. So we desperately need those. The same goes for intelligence sharing. So I think the fact that we managed to avoid this, and the Trump administration is now saying they're willing to sell weapons to Ukraine, that's better than where we have been a couple of weeks ago.
So does it have the support, you think, of lawmakers? Will it be approved?
I think it will be approved. I think it will.
And to put a finer point for our audience, it would basically link peace and prosperity in Ukraine to peace and to there'd be an incentive for peace and prosperity in Ukraine, because like an investment deal of two companies coming together, that's the way it's being framed here, at least, that would be a way that the United States is sharing in what could be a peaceful and prosperous Ukraine with future projects related to natural resources. And we've had to be really careful with the language here at home, because like you mentioned, the form of different ways that we were talking about natural resources in Ukraine and who had access and who was going to prosper, the details really matter. So this is why the text of the detail and the final text of the deal is going to be really important. And I just want to underscore that for our audience. Go ahead.
It is kind of boring part for this type of conversation, but there is not one deal. There is one deal between the countries, right? And then there are two more technical deals, and the devil is in the details. So I think that we will still find many things which are not so nicely put in those deals, and so on and so forth. But we were not negotiating from a position of strength. Unfortunately, we were negotiating not with a partner who was willing to support Ukraine very much. So I think this is probably the best one we could have got given the circumstances.
It's important to have your perspective on that. And I haven't as well in my reporting really remember something like this coming up when we're talking about negotiations with another country. So it's unique. And that's why I want to proceed slowly to understand what are the particulars of this. Just a final question as we wrap up. You're always so generous with your time. I always tell you it's going to be a shorter conversation than it is, then it's longer, because we enjoy talking to you and you provide really amazing perspective. I want to go back to when we first met. It was over social media because you posted a photo that became quite infamous, because you were sitting next to a gun, a rifle, and you were on your laptop working. And it was during the early days of the invasion. And it was such a sign of the threat, the personal security threat that an individual felt during a time when many of us didn't have that same experience and haven't seen something like that since World War II. And we happen to be talking on a day where in parts of Europe we're celebrating the end of World War II. And it just has me thinking so many different things about what does it take to have lasting peace, but also what does it require of an individual? And so I'm just wondering if you could reflect on thinking of yourself in that photo and that time, what you were thinking. Do you still have a rifle in your household? Are you concerned about your personal security in the same way? Can you just talk us through the different thoughts that come to you as a person, as a mother during this time, trying to navigate really the unknown?
Oh gosh, that's not going to be
It's a
a
big
fun.
question.
That's a
It
big question.
wasn't brief. I'm
Yeah,
sorry, Ina. It wasn't a brief question.
yeah. No, the problem is not with your question. It's about my answers. I watched for some reason lots of movies about World War II over the past couple of years, particularly in the month leading to the big war here. Me and my partner, we chose to watch many movies. And I remember looking at the people in those movies, be them documentaries, fiction, and I looked at those people like civilians typically, and I said like, okay, those are the people who lived in war. That is just their life. Like it can never be my life. It's something very different from me. It's it cannot be me. And I very much remember myself I think the second month of the big war. I haven't seen my partner, I haven't seen my child. I couldn't understand like how to navigate this except for continue to give the interviews to the foreign media and explain what is happening. And I thought to myself, I cannot be the person who is living through the war. That was not my plan. That is not where I belong. I still don't feel like the the fact that I lived in the war is going to be part of my history. I never chose to do so. It's a very weird thing to explain. I can't find better words for that. It still feels like, how can this be happening to me? I remember stories from my great grandmother who lived through the World War II, and she was telling some of that, and I thought like, okay, that was her life. I now realize that I'm going to be a great grandmother someday, and I will be telling the stories of how I lived through the war. But it's just so difficult to accept that this has taken 3.5 years of my life of living in this tension, living in this constant, like I cannot sleep for longer than 2 hours. I wake up and I check the news. If I manage to sleep 4 hours in a row, that's a huge success. It's something that is like I refuse to think of it as normal. I refuse to accept that this is something that I'm just living through. This is part of my life. I still continue to be amazed that this is happening to me and my family, my loved ones. Because if I give up, if I say that, okay, this is normal, then I don't think I will have the strength to continue this fight. So we have to continue thinking that this is not okay. People shouldn't be living through the war. Nobody was born to live through the war. And that is what I'm very much concerned about, reporting about Ukraine's war in the media on the West. It's like just some piece of news to get on the background, and then Russians attacked with drones another Ukrainian city. There are people in those cities. There were children who were killed in Kryvyi Rih a month ago. There were, it's just impossible to accept that this is reality, that this is normal. And I think we shouldn't accept it as normal. So it's very difficult and very exhausting. And I want nothing more than for this to be over. I was trying to imagine what will it feel like when the war is over. And I think that I will just fall asleep for like 24 hours. And yeah, because you are just working with this huge weight on your shoulder all the time, particularly with my partner being on the front line. That's terrifying. That's something that I can never forget or forgive, that I had to experience that. So, okay, we turned this into therapy session.
No, this is and honestly, this is why I wanted to have this conversation with you now, because what you said about the media is so critical, and what we're also trying to help solve with Smarter News, because we're reaching directly American families, and it's easy to become desensitized to the headlines. And so we need that personal perspective and the policy perspective, which you always provide us so generously. And I'm very grateful.
To add the story that I told you before we started recording, which is, I think, exemplifies how living under war feels like. I have a son who's 12 now, and he called me today in the middle of the day, was when I was at the meeting with the Estonian minister, and he called me and I couldn't respond. And he called me again and I couldn't respond because I was at the meeting. And he texted me like, "Where are you?" And I said, "I'm at the meeting. I can't call to answer you right now." And he said, "Oh, good. I thought you were dead." And I think this is This is a child. He's 12. He lived in the war since he was 9. And this is him just being terrified that something has happened to his mom, and something can happen. The chances of then something happening to his mom are much higher compared to, if he lived in peace. And that was just him being scared that something happened to his mom. I don't think any child should experience that. So, but that is even, and look, there are kids who have been kidnapped. There are kids who are living in Kharkiv, on instant bomb attacks. There are kids whose parents have been killed. So compared to many other kids in Ukraine, my son is living a relatively okay life, but it's still a terrifying experience that he will, this will be defining his life in the future as well.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, a story that is part of a continuum for generations to come. And so it's not just about this present moment, but also about the future and lasting peace.
Thank you for having me. Thank you.